Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's MDICx webinar on quality metrics, best practices, case examples, and how metrics factor into the case for quality. My name is Stephanie Christopher. I'm the Program Director at MDIC for the Case for Quality, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. We're delighted to have three speakers joining us to talk about this topic. Francisco Vicente is the Program Manager for the Case for Quality at the U.S. FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Beth Staub is the Group Compliance Officer for Global Quality and Operations at Stryker. Beth is also a board member of MDIC and the board champion for the MDIC Case for Quality project. And Marla Phillips is the Director of Xavier Health at Xavier University, and Marla was also the co-leader of MDIC's Metrics Initiative. For those of you who may not be familiar, MDIC is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are the first ever public-private partnership created with the sole objective of advancing regulatory science of medical devices for public benefit. What this means is we work together with our industry, nonprofit, and regulatory partners to work on issues that are important to all medical device companies in order to make products and bring products to market in a safer, more cost-effective, and efficient way. We are a membership-based organization with 59 participating members, and we currently have 6 projects ongoing, including the Case for Quality, which you'll be hearing about today. Our first speaker will be Cisco Vicente, and he's going to talk a little bit about CDRH's vision and perspectives on the Case for Quality. And Cisco, I have just given control of the keyboard to you.
Sounds great. Thank you, Stephanie, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody who's on the line and listening in. So one of the things I think that we want to make sure this is working here for us, address, is really why it was that we are engaged in this initiative and what CDRH has taken in all this, and it really starts with our vision from a center standpoint. It's really geared around patients in the U.S. having access to high-quality, safe, effective medical devices of public health importance first in the world. That lets us really rethink and remap a lot of how we are engaging, what we are looking to do in order to deliver that best outcome for those patients. Our Case for Quality really is a collaborative venture, and I think, as Stephanie mentioned beforehand, through MDIC, we've been able to really collaborate and bring together a group of stakeholders that includes industry. It includes the payers, providers, and down to the patient level, really, to be able to drive what is important for assuring high-quality product, what's important for ensuring patient safety, and ultimately, really, how can we accelerate that access to high-quality medical devices. The strategic priorities for CDRH, and I don't know if these things will be made available these slides will be made available to the attendees, but there is a link here for those who want to see what the full array of the strategic priorities are for the 2016-2017 timeframe. But today we're really going to discuss the one that really matters for the work that we're doing in Case for Quality, and it's really to promote a culture of quality and organizational excellence. And that is a two-pronged approach. It is one that we are taking on internally as a center. There is a lot of work ongoing in order to make sure that we are walking our talk. So that's in process in there, but another piece of that is how do we affect the whole ecosystem on the outside. To that end, we've set up a goal for this time frame, which is really strengthen the product manufacturing quality within the medical device ecosystem. I want to just take a moment to really highlight that wording right there. It's strengthen product and manufacturing quality within that ecosystem. We're not looking for a new compliance baseline, and that's one of the things I want to make sure we capture is what is this activity not going to be. It's not a new bar. It is really about how do we come together as a collaborative in order to assure that best outcome for the patient. It really gives us a lot of leverage to figure out how can we all move and modify our thinking in order to move beyond that compliance baseline. To that end, one of the things that we've committed to as an agency is to really deliver a voluntary program that recognizes an independent evaluation of product and manufacturing quality. by the end of this year. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that might mean in a bit. So where are we going for case for quality? So the 2017 timeframe, I think I've already mentioned, our goal is to really put together this proposal for a pilot program. There's a lot that needs to be defined in that category, and that's a lot of the work that's being engaged with MDIC on right now. The 2018 timeframe really has us in that pilot phase of this program, expanding it, really learning and looking at the data collected, what are the potential metrics and KPIs that can be gleaned from that, looking at these outcome metrics for comparative quality, and then looking to think about how we enhance the program moving forward. 2019 has us really implementing some of those enhancements, figuring out how do we start sharing these outcome indicators. Part of our vision is to be able for those high-performing manufacturers to really put out, here's what they're delivering, here's what's going on, and really help to build this competitive marketplace around their delivery of high-quality products and organizational excellence. We want to expand to provide resources for new innovators. We've heard that several times that that is an area that is potentially going to be neglected. One of the tools that we're utilizing in this approach actually gives us a way to do that, but it needs a little bit more development and a little bit more learning, so that's a longer-term activity in order to engage in that. And as I mentioned before, right now in its current incarnation, this is not a program that is geared towards firms who are struggling with compliance. This is for the ones who are already there. They've met that threshold and are moving and trying to really implement their practices that exceed that baseline. But we want to be able to use these tools in order to help other companies who are looking to learn and come up to speed. And then for our 2020 timeframe, we want to really start operationalizing this program. We want to expand what potential tools there are available to utilize and leverage. And then part of this initiative is also geared with some of the other strategic priorities. How do we start balancing out the pre-market and post-market decisions that we make based on the better information that we're getting throughout the development of this program and the data being collected. So, next slide. So what does this mean? We get that asked a lot, and really the agency is looking to really make a complete shift in the way we view our regulatory paradigm. We want to really be focused on that organizational excellence and really drive innovation. We want to get more confidence in the manufacturing and in the product that's delivered, and that's one of the reasons why we're engaged in this mode. That allows us to really consider faster time to market. The better the information to drive those regulatory decisions, the better we can allocate our resources from an agency standpoint. And from, I think, everybody's real perspective, it's a focus on what's the most important to patients. That's really what we all want to get to, and really keep that in the back of our minds with every decision or activity that we take on. What does that mean from the way we do things and the way we do business? We're looking at removing participants from our agency's work plan for routine inspections. We're considering waiving those pre-approval inspections where appropriate. Engagement in meetings and issue resolution. Again, if your systems and everything that your organization is doing is performing and we've got the confidence in it, we all should be looking for a solution, not necessarily our typical enforcement modes. We want to be able to look at our submission requirements and how do we modify those to provide faster responses and less regulatory overhead or burden for them. Accelerating approval paths where we've got better information and a better balance of pre- and post-market data. And again, the last one is really how do we start building this competitive marketplace? Those manufacturers who are doing the right things, how can they learn, how can they actually gain that as a competitive advantage? And let's see here. For some reason, this is not advancing.
Cisco, I had to briefly take back control, but you should have control again. Sorry.
It's funny because it might just be the last slide that we're looking at. Oh, yep. So I'm going to transition over to Beth Stahl, who actually will take it from here, and we can continue.
Thank you, Cisco, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us to talk and learn more about the case for quality and particularly the role of metrics.
Beth, you should have keyboard control.
Not yet. There we go. You heard from Stephanie and Cisco about the MDIC's work in the case for quality. Our vision is to develop a better understanding of what changes are necessary to catalyze industry movement towards improved device quality. Compliance is the ticket to get into the game. It's the baseline. It sets up good quality systems, which is certainly an enabler of device quality, but it doesn't guarantee it. So you can see here our strategy of working through our stakeholders to understand what kind of projects are important to drive this forward. And the metrics work that you're going to hear about today is an example of one of those. Case for Quality currently has 4 active projects. Analytics, which is aimed at developing a tool set that will allow payers and providers to assess the performance of devices across a range of quality indicators in a consistent way. Maturity models, another one that you'll be hearing about more from MDIC this year, which is a way of beyond just inspections or audits of adding another dimension to how mature is a company on their quality journey. And 2 that really tie together for today, metrics, which is about a tool set for measuring quality, and competency. How then do we take that tool set and use it to drive the improvement of products? You know, metrics are very much the language of quality. They're certainly the language of business, and I think sometimes we do struggle on the quality side to apply that same principle. Our business leaders know that they're responsible for quality and compliance. Setting up an effective metrics program can help them understand how to execute that responsibility. And you see on the left an example of work that's come out of MDIC on the competency side, a white paper that's available on our website for management review and building an effective program for helping our leaders execute that management responsibility that they do have. So if metrics are the language of business and quality, why does it feel like it's so hard sometimes? Here's some common hang-ups I think that we run up against as quality professionals. The absence of standard metrics. You walk into any company, any plant, and you talk about standard cost. Everybody understands how that's done. We've not had that kind of consistency on the quality side. Are we measuring product quality, the quality system, or compliance? I think it gets confusing sometimes. There's a role for measuring all of those. And helping everyone understand that regardless of what the data says, that the quality department, the quality function, doesn't own everything, that other stakeholders in the company are responsible for moving quality forward. So the work that you're about to hear that was done by Marla Phillips and a terrific team about coming up with some standard approaches for how we talk about and measure quality, I think is a great leap forward, and I'd like to turn it over to Marla.
Okay, thank you, Beth. And I guess you're going to give me controls? Yep, here we go. Okay, thank you everyone for joining in. We're excited to be able to share this work with you. What I'm going to share with you is the culmination of 2 years worth of work. And when we started out, our purpose and the outcome was to identify meaningful metrics for industry and to do it in such a way that we would provide a system of metrics across the total product life cycle. And that was really key. Instead of a lot of our metrics are outcome-based. It's in production, and it's on once the product is out on the market. But we intentionally wanted to look across the total product life cycle. And we wanted to do it in a way that would inform internal company decisions and trigger action. And wouldn't that be a breath of fresh air? You do all this work with metrics, and it's actually used for something, right? How often do we, in our companies, generate a ton of metrics, and then it just sits until the next month when we generate them again? And the ultimate goal is to shift that right first time mentality closer and closer and closer to those initial days of development, so then everything is right going forward from that point. Before I get into the metrics and the work we did, I do want to share what you'll see are 3 metrics, and I'll share in a few minutes that we basically chose one metric for each of the 3 phases of production: pre-production, production, and post-production. So I do want to say up front that we are not suggesting that you throw out all of your metrics and these are the 3 that are going to give you the key to everything there is to know. Instead, this was a way to look at how could we assess those 3 phases of production. And then you can take that information in our work and compare it to what you're looking at within your own companies and see if you want to add these to what you're doing, or maybe you're already doing them. And then in some cases, you might be doing something even more sophisticated than what we're suggesting. And so you can say, great, I'm on track with the work that this group came up with. So by no means throw out what you're doing, and there certainly are more metrics that you need to be looking at to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your organization. Additionally, obviously in 15 minutes, I'm not going to be able to share with you the how-to, like how to implement these metrics, or even how to identify these metrics or other metrics that are right for your company. So we will be doing that through an MDIC workshop at Xavier on May 2nd, where we can actually do hands-on and really dive deep. So this is meant to give you just an overview of what we came up with and the information that we can put in your hands. So the next few slides, as you can see, 5 slides, I'm going to show you the team members, and you will have these slides afterwards, so I'm not going to read the names by any means, but just wanted to show you the diversity and the type of people we had involved and the types of companies. We intentionally wanted to make sure we had small companies, large companies, as you can see here, FDA, so we made sure we had a diversity of perspectives. I want to pause on this slide for a second and point out that Kristen McNamara listed here co-led this initiative and was just a fantastic co-leader. I mean, her expertise and her leadership was just unmatched. So what a treasure to have involved in this program so directly. But as you can see, I think at the very end we had 46 members involved, and as I mentioned, it spanned from 2014 to 2016, so it was 2 years worth of work. So how could it possibly have taken 2 years, right? We made sure that we went through a very methodical approach, because you can come up with lots of ideas and just start chasing them and assume they're good without vetting them out. So as I mentioned, we wanted to make sure we looked across the total product life cycle, and in order to do that, we broke the team into the 3 phases of production. So we had a team for each of those 3 phases, and their goal was to look only at their phase, and it forced them to look deep into how could you assess this phase in addition to how are we, instead of just, well, here's the metrics we're tracking, let's just take the best and go with them. So it was really more of a discovery exercise as well. So how would we make sure we discovered in the right direction? We thought, let's first identify the critical systems in each of those phases of production, and we came up with a total of 11. That way, if the metrics that we come up with at the end will at least be on the target board, and we're not somewhere off in left field. Once we had the critical systems, we said, okay, what activities do you need to be doing in those critical systems to ensure the quality of your product? And we identified 97 activities. Then the next step, of course, would be, well, how can you measure the effectiveness of those activities? And from the 97 activities, we came up with 208 ways to measure those activities. Of course, not every idea is a great idea, or fits for the intended purpose. So we put all of those ideas, all 208, in a cause and effect matrix, with which, if you're familiar with those, you basically can assess anything against critical criteria you identify to see how correlated is this idea against your criteria. And when we did that, we whittled the 208 ideas down to 124. You might be thinking, well, that's still a lot of numbers, a lot of metrics to be looking at. The neat thing is, though, when you use a cause and effect matrix and you have columns of criteria, and we had 5, spanning from patient safety and quality system robustness and process reliability, things like that, even financial aspects, make sure it wasn't extremely costly. When you do that, you can sort that list based on any which way you want. And so if you take the ones that rank highly against all 5 of your criteria, then you have like this cutoff point to say, wow, these are really strong metrics that we should be looking at. And then separately, if you wanted to find the ones, hey, let me look at the ones that are geared very strongly to patient safety, you can cut and sort that data in so many ways. But it did allow our team to come up with a methodical way, an objective way to assess all these ideas we were coming up with. And in the end, we wanted to pick measures to convert into metrics. At this point, we were adopted by the MDIC group, and this was 2015, and we were asked to choose 3 measures, so to go from 124 to 3, because it could be done within a year's time frame and it could be piloted. And so we decided that as we're looking at the total product life cycle, if we have to pick 3, let's pick one from each phase of production, and then that way we could say, here's a representative way that you can look at quality in those phases of production. So when we did our Pareto analysis in the cause and effect matrix, we really had the numbers you see here that we felt were good ideas as a way to measure those areas of production. So, for example, from the 4 ideas in pre-production, we chose 1. From the 8 in production, we chose 1. And from the 3 in post-production, we chose 1. We kind of cheated a little bit, even though we were asked to come up with 3 ways. We proposed a way that this could be assessed enterprise-wide. So we did kind of come up with that in addition to the 3 metrics. So what I'm going to show you for each of the metrics, so there's going to be 1 per phase of production, is kind of the goal of what that metric was, what the metric is, and then some information about it. So that's going to be the process I'm going to follow here. So for pre-production, again, that goal is to drive that right first time mentality as close to those initial days of development as possible. And you want it so that post-design transfer, the changes due to inadequacies are limited, if not eliminated. And so what we want to look at is the total number of changes, whether it's product and process, across all of your projects, divided by the total number of projects. So what's important here is to look at what those changes are. I will point out that a year ago, we asked about 400 people that were at our device conference how many of them look at this metric in this phase of production, and there were 3 people that raised their hands. So it was identified as a tremendous opportunity to get your hands around information that you might not be looking at this point. So as I promised, here's some information about this particular metric. The team suggested only including changes required due to inadequate product or process development. You want to look at which ones, because you can make changes for a whole host of reasons, but it doesn't necessarily mean your design robustness wasn't okay. You can calculate this with or without the denominator. You can either scale it or not. It's up to you. And each organization must determine what constitutes a project. And it's ideal to measure the changes required during transfer. And that was interesting because when we formed the pre-production team, they said, well, how can we measure how good we're doing when it's all trial and error and you're testing things? So our statement was, at some point R&D says, okay, I've got it. And then they do the transfer. So if during transfer you have failures, then that shows you that it really wasn't ready for transfer. So if you can take this measure and measure all the way back to the transfer stage, that would be ideal. And then you could measure it during production and post-production once it's on the market. So what's interesting too is we want to take a look at planned versus unplanned. And this was a huge discussion with the group. But if you just remember that the goal of this is to make your organization better, not to make the metric better, then as an organization, you can put some boundaries around what you mean by planned and what you mean by unplanned, and you all understand the intent. Instead of, well, should we include this or not, and, it's going to be skewed this way or that. Your goal is to make your organization better. But we did put some information in the final document that we generated to say, here's a guidance on what we mean by planned. Enhancements and new features already considered during the design phase, but it wasn't implemented prior to launch. So realignment of production process steps for efficiency, adding a product feature if it doesn't change the product performance. I mean, you can come up with what your organization means by planned. And then unplanned, corrections implemented due to unanticipated voice of the customer feedback, complaints, or any other unforeseen required changes. So you could have quality issues driven by complaints, returns, CAPA, production yields not performing well, nonconformance reports, and so on. Okay, so then the next metric that we looked at was in the production phase. And of all the ideas we came up with, even though it sounds simple and your organization might be doing this, we really felt that the right first time metric in production said it all. I mean, when you're looking at it, can we do it right first time? So really the goal was to gather nonconformance information during production related to inadequate product and process development. So you could have human error, you could have an electrical shutdown of your equipment, that kind of stuff. But we're looking at the ones that were due to that inadequacy of the design robustness. And also a goal is to inform senior leaders of the nonconformance rate in production related to those inadequacies. And that way they can drive that overall improvement to the system back in R&D. So then the next time it comes through, it'll be right first time, and that helps drive that right first time mindset. So as I indicated earlier, we cheated a little bit and really folded in that enterprise-wide piece to these metrics, even though we were only asked to come up with 3. So this is just a way to drive that enterprise-wide assessment, buy-in, and improvement. So here's the metric, and it's basically a right first time metric. So what number of units were manufactured right first time within or across lots versus the number of units started. So information related to this is, it was interesting, the team said, really you should include all nonconformances initially and then do your triage. So the ones, include everything. Like I said, the human error or the electrical shutdown, include them so that you can triage them out. Or if you already have that triage in place, then just go right ahead and include the ones that truly are related to the inadequacies of product or process development. They did recommend including planned rework and setup scrap because even though it's planned, you might not notice a trend in increase of those, and obviously you don't want that. So it could help you make sure that you're not trending in the wrong direction with planned rework and setup scrap. You want to track and trend this on a rolling basis to make sure that you're aware of any changes that are occurring. And you really, if you're going to look at this across products or across plant sites, as an organization, you want to define these terms consistently. So what do you mean by number of units started? What do you mean by nonconformances and those kinds of things? And it would be very, very hard to come up with a definition for an entire industry. And many of our team members indicated that internally through their own companies, it was very, very hard to get alignment across plant sites. So that is not an easy exercise, but if you're going to do a comparison, it's necessary to do. Okay, so then post-production. The goals of the post-production metrics are to analyze key post-market surveillance data so that you can eliminate, reduce, and prevent future on-market failures. So again, the earlier you can shut down the potential for failure, the better off you'll be. In addition to that, we talk about triaging root causes of the on-market indicators that are related to inadequate product and process development, so it can be cycled back in that enterprise-wide review. And again, driving that right first time mentality in product and process development, as we've been saying. So you want to eliminate or at least limit the failures you are seeing on market. Okay, so instead of one metric, we looked at an aggregation of metrics, and you can figure out the right aggregation for you. You might not have equipment, so you're not having installation failures and things like that. But in the white paper that we produced, we define these and explain how they can be used. So we thought at a minimum we would at least put some suggested ways to measure service records, installation failures, complaints, MDRs, and recalls. And recalls were looked at to two different ways: the rate of recall, so the number of units recalled divided by the number of units sold, as well as the number of recalls. So you could have one recall, but it was, a million units, versus you have 10 recalls and maybe 10 units were impacted. So getting a sense of the scale. So now with the post-production metrics, we have three different, levels of how you can implement this. The most basic way is ensure your organization is calculating and tracking each of those metrics. Again, you might have a much more sophisticated system, or you might not have included something or thought to look at recalls in the two different ways, something like that. But, step one is let's at least be calculating these. Step two is we provide advanced calculations where you can incorporate risk profile information into that calculation for each indicator to give you an idea of what is the the level of risk involved with what you're seeing. So it's not just a number, it's, well, what does that actually mean? And then the third step is a comparative analysis that you can use to assess across the board and see shifts that are occurring, good or bad. And you can do that through mechanisms such as dashboards, scorecards, heat maps, and things like that. So it's the aggregation piece at the very end. So step one is calculate, step two is fold in risk, and then step three is to take that folded in risk piece and now start aggregating to see what you can, identify within your organization that you might not have recognized otherwise. Interestingly, you can incorporate the pre-production and production metrics with post-production, so you can overlay and get an overall picture of your product risk. And then that gives senior leaders an enterprise-wide view of the risk to product quality. So, as I mentioned, this white paper, we called it the best practices document. The goal of that was to help organizations understand how to best use the output from the metrics to inform decisions and trigger action. So again, don't just calculate metrics just to calculate them. How can you use it in a meaningful way? We want that metric output to be used to understand root causes, perhaps combine the metric output with other metrics to understand a more holistic picture and analyze trends. And the goal is to provide that feedback loop to improve systems from the earliest point possible. So there's that enterprise-wide piece that I was talking about. So you have a way to measure pre-production, production, and post-production, and importantly, feed it back in as early as possible. Unfortunately, and it's going to sound odd, but unfortunately, a lot of us are really good scientists. And so when we have failures in production or failures on the market, we're really good at fixing them, but it never goes back to fix the system that allowed it to occur to begin with. And I mean the early system. So why didn't we find this out during human factor studies or voice of the customer, those kinds of systems. So unfortunately, our scientific brains get in the way of allowing us to take that step back and fix the systems from the earliest point possible. So I mentioned, you know, that higher level aggregation view. And so imagine if you take, using a heat map, you take an aggregated score for all of your external indicators, so your post-market production risk, and then you map that against your internal risk score. So you've got your pre-production and production metrics aggregated. And then what you would find is each of those points would be the risk of that product across its total product life cycle. So now you see the risk in total. And if it's higher up on the y-axis, then that means, wow, we're having problems internally. If it's farther out on the x-axis, you're seeing a lot more failures out on the market. So it gives you an idea of what's going on from a high level in a snapshot that can allow you to start asking the right questions and can start triggering some action. And importantly, you look at this over time. So if that item 1 all of a sudden shifts down to the green or up to the red, you'll see it and you'll understand it. And it's interesting how a lot of companies like to focus on the red, obviously, which is good, want to focus on that, but also focus on the green and understand, well, why are those so good and what can we learn from that? So something like this really provides a great opportunity for companies to learn more than they might realize is already in their hands, that type of information. So as I've mentioned, the white paper is something that we published, I think it was like June or July last year, and it is available on the MDIC website. So with that, I will turn it back over to Beth.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Marla, for sharing that great work by the team on an approach for designing a successful metric program. What I'd like to do now is share some best practices or some real-life experiences from Stryker Corporation about bringing your metrics program to life. And Stephanie, I'm just waiting to get the...
You should have control.
Yeah. Can you...
Try.
Sorry, folks.
Can you try it again?
No, I'm going to take it back and
okay.
We'll work together. All right, so as I said, we've done a lot of work on our own personal quality journey at Stryker Corporation over the last 10 years. And what I wanted to share is just some of the lessons learned about bringing your metric program to light. And if there were 3 things I wanted to leave you with today, it's about prioritizing your opportunities, making sure that you identify process owners to drive accountability, and that once you design your metrics and decide what you want to measure, the formats and the forums that you use with them are equally important. So prioritizing your opportunities. As you learned from Marla in terms of the work of our design team, there is a universe of ways to go at this. And it can be a little daunting sometimes to figure out where to start. What I'm suggesting is you focus on the significant few to get going here. And sometimes that's driven by where your business problems are and where you think you can have the most impact. Practically speaking, what can I get? There may be metrics that you would love to be able to begin to assess, but the reality is getting the data is such a big lift that you'll use all of your energy trying to get something that you may never be able to get your hands on, so maybe you start with other things. What do you already have? If you've got some metrics in place that maybe are not identical to that framework that you heard about from Marla, but it's close enough, you want to leave those in place. and start someplace else. And always be considering, what should I stop if you're going to add any of those life cycle metrics that you heard about? Should you retire some of the previous ones? And one thing that we learned is they don't need to be perfect, but there are some caveats that really will contribute to your success. The first is that accuracy is paramount. If you're rolling out something new in the metrics department, there is a huge change management exercise. Organizations run on metrics. People may feel they're going to be bonused or viewed on their success. So you want to make sure that if you're promoting something new, that you've really checked and double-checked your data, because quite frankly, people will be looking for opportunities to poke holes in it if you're starting to highlight something as a problem. That's human nature. Document your assumptions and your calculations. You heard that from Marla. Again, there's no such thing as perfect here. You're going to have to make some assumptions, but make sure they're written down. Make sure that you get buy-in with them, if they're financial metrics on that right first time. Make sure your finance organization agrees with them. If it's the change management, make sure your R&D guys have a chance to see them. And consider the culture and unintended consequences as you put this in place. If you're a high accountability organization, you don't want people running off and starting to change things until you really understand what the metrics are telling you and starting to use them for more than perhaps they're mature enough to be used for. Second, really take account into process owners to drive accountability. Ideally, you want to have all your metrics tied to your business processes and your process owners. Involve them in creating the metrics and setting the target. So if you think about the 3 dimensions that you heard about from Marla here, your design process control owner, R&D typically in most organizations, really should be your partner in that pre-production metric. You could sit in the quality function and design it, and if you hand it over to them, there will be resistance. There will be people sitting on the sidelines trying to poke holes in your data. Make them your partners both in designing it, and then make them accountable for driving improvement. The production metric is a classic measure of production and process control. Your operations or your manufacturing folks, make sure that they've got buy-in. And if you're looking at the post-market side, depending on how you're structured, if you've got a post-market surveillance or a complaint department, you want to make sure that they're bought in there as well. That's one way to make sure that you can drive the right change and ownership as you go. And then finally, one of the things that we've seen is that metrics really need the right formats and the right forums to get the maximum value. So metrics and review forums, in my view, equal continuous improvement. You want to really avoid, if you can, email-only distribution, particularly early on. If you've created something new, it's not well understood, maybe there's people looking for reasons to say it's not accurate. You want to really make sure that you've got some live review forum to review and discuss the data. You can look for existing forums with process owners and decision makers, or you can create the management review, of course, is really all about this. But you probably have some business review meetings that you could introduce some of these. The post-market would be a logical one there in terms of what your customers' experience are. Production meetings, right? The right first time is a logical one there. You probably have some sort of R&D project review going on where you're looking at data around how fast your projects are going. Would be great to add another metric that looks at the quality of that design process as well. So getting in front of live audience is a great way to make sure that the data doesn't just sit in somebody's inbox. And then finally, think about the format. So you heard from Marla that exercise that they went through of measures into metrics. You then have to decide how you're going to present them. A term I learned from someone I used to work with that I like a lot is ensuring a balance of what I see data and what I do data. What I see is that results in that trend over time. I'm getting better, I'm getting worse. Good to know, but it's not enough data to actually make improvement. To do that, you need that what I do view, which is typically your process or your Pareto view of the data. And making sure that you represent both is a way to make sure that you can drive action and know what to do. And here are some formats that we typically use at Stryker for doing that. And I'd also say don't shy away from setting goals and targets. This has been a very controversial thing for us in the early days. And what we typically do is have an overall performance target. You see that in that red line for a right first time metric on the left side overall. We want to be performing at that level. But then for our individual businesses or divisions, we may set individual targets. You want targets to be challenging enough that people are pushed to improve, but you don't want them so challenging that they feel like they've got no chance of success. So what we've settled on is negotiating individual targets with individual businesses to hit that right mix of challenging but achievable. And I would say for starters, an easy target is better than no target at all. You need to be able to measure yourself against some sort of benchmark. And you may need to pilot some of the early metrics for a while before broadly distributing. Start small, make sure you get the buy-in, make sure that you're accurate. You know, the worst thing that can happen is somebody starts poking holes in your data. So that overall goal for performance is important, as well as individual targets for each site or business unit to make sure that everybody feels that they have a chance of winning. So metrics are the language of business, and they should be the language of quality as well. They really are the way, as a quality function, we can help connect quality to our patients, our customers, and financial performance for our company. It's a way of translating the company's quality performance into actionable data, and they also take the emotion out of hard discussions, resources, course corrections, and organizational responsibility. And I'll leave you with a quote that I love. It comes from an article on management review and management responsibility. The outputs of the quality system metrics are as rich with information about the vitality of the business as market research or competitive intelligence. It's a great way, when done well, of engaging your CEO and engaging their interest rather than the threat of regulatory enforcement. So hopefully you got a sense today of the partnership between the FDA and MDIC and our work to make this a reality. Cisco, bring us home.
That sounds good. So I wanted to just let everybody on the team know some of the things that we are looking towards doing in the upcoming year in order to get to that final pilot program proposal. One of the things that we're actively looking at internally is really reviewing what is going and centered around manufacturing reviews. These are 30-day notices, site change, PMA originals, and this is what's going to be key for that first program pilot. And we're hitting that area because manufacturing is very tangible. Everybody really knows around that. When we talk about metrics, it's one of the areas where it's very easy to define and really get tangible data around the performance, those characteristics, what's of importance. So it's a good place for us as an agency to start looking and then considering how we modify our review submissions around those pieces. So things that we're looking at is, again, sites that have demonstrated maturity is how do we get the 30-day notices to the point where it's just a notification and you can start implementing immediately. Site changes, what exactly is required of us once you've got insurance that your site is producing and manufacturing with a higher and a continuous improvement mindset. Do we need to see a full submission, or is it, again, something we can move to a notification type of standpoint? Same thinking applies to the PMA original manufacturing modules. We want to then take that same concept once we've gone through the exercise internally and apply it to the design review activities so that we can leverage and accelerate the submissions around the 510K or maybe the PMA design module. Where are opportunities really to leverage the performance that a manufacturer is delivering so that we as an agency can better use our resources. And again, you, the manufacturer, can get these things out to the market faster, produce better, get the product or improvements into your system faster, all for that patient benefit that we, I think, are all driving towards. Next bullet, if possible. So what are we working towards? The other piece that we're engaged in internally and we're working with MDIC on is the pilot implementation plan. Right? There's a lot of stuff that needs to be defined. The operating parameters, the rules of engagement. We are looking to conduct a public meeting around the proposal once we've got enough of that straw man outlined for additional feedback and data. And then down towards the end of the year, once we make the final announcement with those details, solicit participation. So, and we are partnered with MDIC in order to deliver this. I don't know if you want to take over, Beth, from that standpoint.
And then on the MDIC side, you can see the big focus for us this year is the maturity model team and the analytics team. We've got program work underway in support of the objectives that Cisco just described. Our goal is to start with some pilot operations in both spaces. If you're not familiar with those projects, I would encourage you to visit the MDIC website, which has information on our work in those spaces, as well as an update on our public forums where we can share what's underway.
Great. Thank you to all of our speakers. And at this time, I'd like to open things up for questions. And I've actually already had a first question drop in. And Cisco, I think this question is likely directed to you, and that is the program going to be linked to the CMS evaluation analysis, CMS analysis of devices for reimbursement?
So I'm sorry, so the question was around the CMS analysis for reimbursements?
Yes. If the voluntary program will link to that.
So not in the initial stages. I think one of the things that we've always looked at in terms of just even the collaboration with MDIC and bringing in payers into the concept is down the road. This all probably has to tie together in order to start really providing that sustainable momentum around it. But in the beginning stages of the pilot, that's not going to be considered or factored in.
What is the anticipated effect of the current administration on the program at FDA?
So that's always an interesting question. We're always trying to figure out what things might change. But right now, I really don't think that this has any, if I want to say, negative implications for where the current administration is looking to go. On the contrary, I think we're really looking to drive and remove a lot of the burden and activity for those that are high performing, which I think is in alignment with a lot of the goals that the administration is setting forth. So I really don't anticipate anything, but you know, it's dynamic, and we could always figure out what happens between now and the time to roll out of the pilot.
Our next question, what efforts, if any, are being made for CDRH and CDER to align on their metrics initiatives for companies which work across the healthcare industry?
So we are actually, we've been engaged, we are talking, we are meeting and trying to really figure out where each group is going with their initiatives and their activities. Right now, different approaches and different perspectives that each group has taken, but we are in discussions. We are trying to figure out where the possible alignments are, especially as some of the stuff might start to impact combination products on the road. But I think both groups right now are in learning stages with their approaches, so we're just going to keep that internal communication going and figure out how we really start bringing everybody together. Once we've got these things out, then we start getting information and data back.
Terrific, thanks. I will make a note here. I've had a couple of questions. We will meet, this webinar today has been recorded, and we'll make the recording available on the website, and I believe we'll also be able to make available the slides as well. As Marla mentioned before, and Beth as well, all of our papers and other resources of the MDIC work are available on the MDIC Case for Quality website, as well as you can find information about additional or upcoming forums and other opportunities to learn about and engage with the Case for Quality. Let's see, I have another question that just popped in here. Tracking NCMR rates is often considered to be a metric that drives bad behavior or underreporting. Would like to know the expected impact on the RFT metric.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Stephanie, can you repeat the first part of that? I heard the last part.
Sure. Tracking NCMR rates is often considered to be a metric that drives bad behavior, in parentheses, underreporting.
Yes. Yeah, so it's interesting because if there weren't going to be any questions, I was going to bring up a point, but this is perfect for that. That's exactly right. There's a couple things to remember. One is the goal of the metrics is to make your organization better, not the metric better. So if you've got that going on, then you probably have a cultural challenge to deal with. The other aspect is one of the reasons why we came up with that the post-market metric is an aggregation of all of those metrics, because as you look at one metric, that the organization will rally around it and it'll turn out perfect. So let's say you wanted to get your complaints down or something like that, and meanwhile you've got these massive recalls going on. Now that's an extreme example, but that's not unusual. That an unintended consequence is that you fix one thing only to make something else become neglected or to become worse. And one of the things we led a similar initiative on the pharma side, and our one of the production metrics we came up with, because we weren't limited to 3, is one that I find like almost the most fascinating, and it was a commitment index. And so if you say you want to have your training percent completion to be a certain percent, and you really want to go after that, then the next thing you know, the review of your SOPs on an annual or biannual basis goes down because you don't have resources over there. Everybody's focused on their training, or the number of investigations goes down, or you can't close them out in 30 days. So it's kind of like you fix one thing, but you only have so much bandwidth, and so something else falls off. So we actually did an aggregation to look at everything you say you're going to commit to, how does that look across the board? And then something just can't hide. So there's a couple ways you can approach it. One is to, first of all, look at it from a cultural standpoint, and why are you guys really doing these metrics? And then another one is to look at an aggregation so you don't lose track of things that might be going awry off to the side. I will just say, too, when I was at Merck, for example, years ago, one of our presidents said, thought he'd have like a really compelling message to say, we want all of our failures to go down to 0%. I'm like, oh, gosh. So, of course, that drove some interesting behavior where we were renaming things. It wasn't a failure. It was atypical. So you really have to watch what a well-intended message can actually drive in an unintended way.
Great. Thanks, Marla. Another question, I think, perhaps to Cisco, and I think you kind of alluded to this a bit earlier, but this is kind of a little different, a different take on this, and that's, will this approach be aligned with other agencies besides FDA?
Besides FDA, and are we talking about maybe other foreign regulators with that question? If that's the case, right now it is FDA who's leading the charge in this. And again, what we're looking to do is not really change or modify the regulations that guide how these frameworks are applied or done. That's not really what even our assessment model, the maturity model assessment does. It really exercises how well are you executing that already, where are your potential opportunities for improvement, where are leverageable points for that learning, what better data can we actually glean to do this monitor around versus just our typical audits that we send investigators out to do, which we understand and we've heard several times in other feedback sessions can be disruptive. So we're not looking to modify these regs. We're looking to apply a different mechanism and an independent one to see how everybody is executing on those beyond just the establishment of them. So that's the concept there. Now, if we're talking about are we aligned with other other regulatory agencies in the U.S., there are some who leverage this or aspects of this to one degree or another. I do believe that this concept is probably new in its totality, but some of this stuff has already been put in practice in some way, shape, or form and has been demonstrated to work with other internal organizations. If hopefully I covered both aspects of maybe where that question was coming from.
Great. Thanks, Cisco. Another question, will there be guidelines to standardize data collection, or is it only up to each company? If so, how do you benchmark with others in the industry, especially the ones that share the same market?
So I'm going to take a crack at this one, because the reality of the matter is what we're starting with, we're not even sure if we can standardize just yet, or what would be the right things to standardize on. What we are looking to do is start to make steps along this journey of starting to gather this information, starting to gather this data, then really being able to have that discussion with something tangible, something that is really aggregated across maybe different manufacturers. Because I think one of the reasons we've always seemed to hit hurdles when we have that discussion, everybody does it differently, and the answer may be that it needs to be different for each company or each organization. I mean, different maturities, different focuses, that may be the case. What we can arrive at that still gives us that same assurance, that same indication, that's still a work in progress. But one of the things that we're trying to really get to with this pilot is the idea that we need to start somewhere. I think this journey needs to get rolling. We need to start gathering this information. We need to start learning from it, or else I don't think we're ever going to get past that theoretical phase.
And this is Beth. I'll add to Cisco's comments on that as well, which is to reinforce, for starters, we don't see trying to drive this to a like-for-like metric that either company to company or, quite frankly, you know, if the data was made available to the agency, that they could look at one firm's number and make some sort of value judgment versus another's. The idea here is to make sure that firms are measuring quality across the life cycle of projects to try to move us as an industry to a more common language around how that's done, which I think is the logical first step. As Marla said earlier, the feedback she heard from her development team while we were working through this is a really hard thing to do even within the four walls of a large corporation. I can tell you that from Stryker's experience. Products are different. Computer systems and data capture systems are different. Very, very difficult to actually get to an apples to apples and be able to do that kind of comparison. So that's not in the cards right now. It really is trying to make sure that everybody thinks through how to measure quality across the life cycle for their products. They have an approach for doing so, and they're using that to drive improvement.
Yeah, and this is Marla. That's one of the key differences between CDR and CDRH, in that CDRH is looking at it from a maturity model standpoint and putting it into context with the complexity and the criticality of your product, as well as how sophisticated are your ways and means of assessing your own operations. And so it's not so much what was the number that came out of that metric. It is, are you assessing your operations across the board, and how are you doing it?
Great, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one last question. I have, what systems for collecting metrics, metadata have you found to be effective? Off the shelf, self-built, et cetera?
So Beth, I'll let you answer that one, Beth, from your operation.
Yeah, I would say the closer you can stay to your core business system. So depending on how you're handling your let's call it the post-market data, if that's moving through a product lifecycle software, we use TrackWise, for example, so that's our source of data there. Some of the other ones might be tracked through your ERP system. Your change data from R&D might also go through a PLM. So I think the closer you can pull the raw material from your core business system, it minimizes the noise around how good, let's say, the data is. And then it comes down to using some sort of system for visualization. There's quite a few out there. Excel is the most basic and most accessible. A lot of people are doing work with Tableau now as that visualization tool. Microsoft has a business, a BI tool that's available to doing that. But if you can avoid adding extra layers and stay close to the core business systems, I think your life will be a lot easier. You'll be able to certainly normalize the data better, right? Because complaints by itself, business to business, can change a lot. If you can normalize it by units or sales or something, you can get more value out of those numbers. So I think less is definitely more here.
Great. Well, I want to thank our speakers again for presenting such great information to us, and thank all of you for attending and for your great questions. As I said before, please check out our website for additional information on the case for quality, and also you can sign up to hear about our other future webinars for our other projects. We'll look forward to having you join us again next time. Thank you.